don't think the issue right now is raising rates. The question is, if we're going to be serious about reducing our deficit, can we combine some smart spending cuts, because there's still some waste in government? Can we reform our health care programs in particular, because we spend a lot more on health care than every other country does, and we don't get better outcomes? And can we close some loopholes and deductions that folks who are well-connected and have a lot of accountants and lawyers can take advantage of, so they end up paying lower rates than a bus driver or a cop?
It's quite a concession. He says there's still some waste in government, a government that spends $3.6 trillion a year. And I like the way he talks about cutting expenditures on medical expenses, which is, of course, one of the great sources of our deficits. The fact is that in the 2,300 pages of Obamacare, there is nothing about what's probably the single greatest cause of inflation in medical costs in the U.S., and the reason it's infinitely higher here than any other country, which is our need for tort reform. We have an insane malpractice system that anybody in practice will tell you is devastating. And that one study in Massachusetts showed that a quarter of all procedures, referrals, and tests have to do, are put in place not for medical reasons, but out of the fear of being sued. That is a huge source of waste. And there wasn't a word about it in the bill Obama had passed. Why? Because the trial lawyers are big contributors to the Democrats. So if he wants to start to cut, that's where he could start.
The president also talked during that interview about gays in the Boy Scouts. Of course, he's been evolving on this position. It took him a while. Now he's doing it quite rapidly. Here's what he said about whether or not to allow gays and lesbians in the Boy Scouts.
The Scouts are a great institution that are promoting young people and exposing them to opportunities and leadership that will serve people for the rest of their lives. And I think that nobody should be barred for that.
Should be barred from that. Charles, do you agree?
Look, if he's expressing an opinion as a citizen, that's okay. But one of the sacred things about our political system is that we have a very strong and independent civil society. That means that churches, associations, groups like the Boy Scouts are independent, and they stand as a sort of a source of resistance between the citizen and the state. And that ought to be left alone. A president ought not really be weighing in. You ought to leave this, let civil society work it out in ways that are not coercive. He wants to express an opinion, okay, but implying that, I guess the implication is that the government or the law ought to step in, I think is against our way of our constitutional ways.
Juan, any problems with that?
Well, just as an individual, as a dad, you have to, people have concerns and anxieties about the idea of gay scout leaders. But it is appropriate. This is what I didn't understand. I was listening just a moment ago, because it seems to me that presidents of all eras have had to speak to moral issues in the country.
It's not a critical moral issue of the day. By the way, it is a debate, as Juan rightly says, not about whether to let gay scouts in, but whether to have gay scout leaders. And that is a debate, and maybe we should have that debate in public. People, you're for it. But I would say, as a general matter, who cares? The President of the United States should not be wasting whatever moral authority he has remaining on an issue this small.
That's not true, Tucker. And Tucker, in addition to which, you have community to be in the Scouts and to lead in the
We're
Scouts.
$16 trillion in debt. So why is the president wasting his time on nonsense like this?
What's wrong with the president speaking to this critical issue?
That's why. It's pandering.
Let the Scouts work it out internally.
Exactly.
Once it's beyond the moral issue, if you make it into a civil rights issue, then you're inviting the law and coercion. And that's the problem. Let the civil society elements work it out on their own, and they will. We always have.
I need everybody who's listening to keep the pressure on your member of Congress to do the right thing. Ask them if they support common sense reforms like requiring universal background checks or restoring the ban on military-style assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Tell them there's no legislation to eliminate all guns. There's no legislation being proposed to subvert the Second Amendment.
Done. What's frustrating is having to sit here and take it seriously. Anybody who knows anything about this laughs at this. It's not at all serious. No sane person believes that a universal registration, which is in effect what this is, by the way, a government keeping a list of everyone who buys a gun, would prevent any crazy person or any criminal from getting a firearm.
Tucker's exuberance here. I mean,
because it's true,
you know,
and
it's
everyone's
not
so
true.
caught
It's
up in the
just
emotion of it, they don't want to get real.
Let me say, maybe it's your personal opinion, but it has no connection to political reality. Who buys a gun should undergo a universal.
Reality is different from reality.
Reality. People in America are fed up with the extent of gun violence. Pete, I think you are way out of touch with the reality of how much Americans want something done on this subject.
But that's not the reality of what will end crime. The cities with the highest proportion
of
crime are also, I'm not saying that, are also the cities that have the strictest gun control. Explain that.
Because you have states next door with lax gun control, and then you have people engaging in straw purchases and the criminals taking advantage of it. And people are saying,
so criminals don't obey the law is what you're saying. Ooh, newsflash. Okay.
Charles, would universal background checks in any way prevent any of what we have seen so far?
I think that's extremely unlikely. Look, I think, and I'm going to accept your assumption about Juan's sanity, at least.
Thank you.
I'm a guest. I'm being generous.
The only way you're going to make a difference is to do what Australia did. You take away the existing guns. And that's what Tucker is talking about.
And that would never happen.
Well, it's not going to happen here because you'd have insurrection. Australia had 7% of Australians had guns. Here, the number is somewhere around 50% of households. And we have a tradition, and I mean, we have a Second Amendment. You can't do it. But the fact is that if you think you're going to make a difference by, somewhat slowing the increase in number of guns, there are 300 million floating around in the country today. They are going to remain untouched because we have a Second Amendment. It will take 100 years to degrade that stockpile, and that means it's not going to have any effect on the homicide. And that was shown empirically by the fact that we passed a pretty strict quote unquote assault weapons ban in the mid-90s. It lasted a decade and it had no discernible impact.
Tonight, the Baltimore Ravens' narrow victory over the San Francisco 49ers in the Super Bowl was a surprise to many, but no surprise to our Charles Krauthammer, who on Friday boldly predicted that the Ravens would prevail.
Charles.
Ravens by 3.
Say again?
Ravens by 3.
Now, in order to make such a prediction, one needs keen intellect, intuition, a comprehensive knowledge of sport, and a wide-ranging sense of how the dynamics of the season will culminate in football's greatest moment. Such talents are rare, as Charles demonstrated on Friday, and as we found in this piece of videotape. Well, Jack Russell Terriers are very intelligent dogs.
That's exactly how I did it. I did a regression analysis. I consulted a dog, and I was up all night, and I came out with that. But I have to tell you that this has wrecked my New Year's resolution.
Which was?
Be humble.
That's hard for you, man.
I'm going to have to wait until next year.
This has been a Sunfish production.